Okay, I think we're live now, gang. So welcome everyone. This is Dan Hawkins with Summit Leadership Partners. I'm thrilled to be hosting a panel with some very well-known private equity human capital heads to discuss what's next with talent in private equity. The last 15 months have been unprecedented time for both publicly traded companies as well as private equity owned businesses. Most of the last year has forced investors, boards, CEOs, and human capital leads to focus primarily on liquidity, employee safety, remote working, stabilizing their business and their organizations. Probably not surprising to many people on the call that the private equity world has been amazingly resilient during the pandemic. And over the last 6 months, we're seeing an extremely active environment in deal making, IPOs, SPACs, hiring, driving growth with a significant amount of dry powder and inexpensive capital to put to work. In most industries, PE is emerging stronger and busier than ever. The post-pandemic economy and the new normal, however, are creating new extremes in talent management challenges and concerns for private equity portfolio companies. And many of these companies are not prepared simply to address the new normal and the talent challenges that they're facing. I'm really excited to discuss with these panelists what's going on in the private equity world as it relates to emerging out of the pandemic and talent and how to handle these challenges going forward. What we'll be doing is having a discussion with the panelists. I'll share a little bit about a study and having a discussion with these esteemed panelists who I'll introduce in a minute. For those of you that have questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, please use the chat feature or the submit questions feature on Zoom video, and we'll be happy to address your questions towards the end. We're going to make sure that we reserve 10 to 15 minutes towards the end of the call to address all the questions that you have. So to start things off, this is Dan Hawkins, once again, CEO and founder of Summit Leadership Partners. For those of you that are not familiar with Summit Leadership Partners, we work with investors, boards, CEOs, and portfolio company management teams in three principal areas. We do a lot of work around executive assessment, development, coaching CEOs, assessment and onboarding of C-level executives. In addition, we work with portfolio company management teams on scaling their ability to lead a value creation strategy. And then finally, Summit Leadership Partners also has capability and services and organization performance around pre-deal due diligence, as well as post-transaction organization assessment and design implementation. Probably the best way to think of Summit Leadership Partners is when you look across from left to right during a hold period with a private equity firm. We tend to help our private equity partners and the deal teams early on, post LOI and due diligence support, all the way through organization design implementation, coaching the management team and CEOs to drive the value creation plan. We're really there at every step of the deal along the hold period. What I'd like to do now that I'm done with a little bit of the infomercial is share with you a study that we conducted several weeks ago, just to kind of get us kicked off on the topic, which is, once again, post-pandemic, what's new for talent management and private equity. Last month, we conducted a study with 200 private equity portfolio company CEOs to better understand what are they facing, what are they concerned about in respect to talent management matters that may affect their business and their performance. And what I'd like to do is share a few insights with you before we talk to our panelists, just to get kind of the juices flowing on the dialogue. At the end, I'll share with you a way in which you can get a copy of this research study, which we're really excited about. We just finished putting together all of the analyses last week. So in terms of the study that I'm referencing, the theme was portfolio CEOs. We sent it to 200 portfolio CEOs in the healthcare sector, technology, consumer, and manufacturing. And just some quick data, just to get us thinking about talent management with portfolio company CEOs. You'll see here some great concerns on behalf of these CEOs. 83% are concerned about their path for meeting their goals as it relates to talent. 38% are worried about whether they're going to actually execute on talent retention strategies, recruiting needs, and developing their employees. And also another third don't feel like they're making enough progress in talent and are concerned about the future. When it comes to the management team, we also asked a series of questions about how are you feeling about the management team? We've heard some concerns from our clients about burnout and retention and an exodus of talent post-pandemic. You'll see 78% of the CEOs are concerned about burnout in the management team due to the working environment, working remote hours, I'll call it the Zoom fatigue. And then we had some follow-up questions in the survey that we sent out. For those of you that are concerned about management burnout, what's the implication of that? And almost 50% said they're actually concerned about being able to hit their goals due to management burnout and talent-related issues. Succession planning. Succession planning historically hasn't been, I'll call it, high on the radar in talent management and portfolio company CEOs due to the nature of a 3 to 5 year hold period. However, we asked some very specific questions around around succession planning, and almost 100% had concerns with their current level of succession within their own company, with almost half of them having little visibility of what their needs are for the future, concerned about retaining key talent and key leaders coming out of the pandemic. In addition, we asked some questions around the portfolio company CEOs around DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And 44% said they don't have a plan in place. They're not sure how they're going to address DE&I in the future. 25% said, hey, we have a plan, but we haven't done anything yet. So you can add those two together. 69% of portfolio company CEOs are either ill-equipped or really haven't moved the needle yet on DE&I efforts. So this is a bit of a concern as it relates to talent management. Finally, the last couple interesting findings I thought you would like to see, and then I'll turn it over to our panelists. We asked a question around what are your strategies going forward, and 91% of CEOs said they're going to change in some respect and alter their strategies that they've used in the past to attract and develop talent over the next couple of years. We also asked some questions. What role do your private equity investors play when it comes to talent management issues and concerns you're addressing in your companies? 26 said, hey, they're not involved. They're rarely involved in helping our needs. The other 21%, they're involved more than necessary. So I guess we'll hear from our private equity investors in a minute about how they feel about that. But so probably 50% of them you could assume feel like they're getting an adequate level of support and resources to help address talent needs. And then some last facts and figures, and then I'll turn it over to the panel. We tried to kind of carve the data on what do growing companies and portfolio companies, how do they compare with companies that aren't growing? And probably no surprise to you, more than 50% of the companies that clicked that they're growing in some capacity, they're the ones that are facing the most concern when it comes to retaining and developing talent. Another interesting finding, and we tried to stratify the different industry segments, and you see it more in tech than other areas, with 60% of tech companies seeing talent as a big issue, compared to 34% for consumer and 38% for healthcare. So seems like tech's feeling the brunt of the pain when it comes to talent matters. Portfolio company talent matters. So there's just a snapshot of the study that we conducted. Once again, at the end, I'm going to give you an email, and we'll be happy to send you the entire white paper. We've got lots more information for you to use. But you didn't come here for me to speak. You came to hear our panelists. So what I'd like to do is introduce our panelists to you, and then I'll start asking them some questions. And once again, we'll make sure we leave some time at the end, 10 or 15 minutes, for you to ask your questions. So very lucky to have some three very well-known people. Probably most of you know our three panelists today. First, we have Courtney Hagan. Courtney is the Chief Talent Officer at Littlejohn & Company, where she partners with the investment and management teams to acquire, coach, and develop high-performing talent. Previously, Courtney was the SVP of Human Resources for LVMH, where she worked across the company's portfolio of over 70 brands to create and execute strategic HR programs to support talent needs for LVMH in North America. Courtney also led executive talent acquisition for PepsiCo years ago. Welcome, Courtney. It's great to have you. We also have Steve Maxwell. Steve is the Senior Vice President of Portfolio Human Capital for Audex Private Equity, a premier capital partner for the middle market industry, where he partners with middle market leaders to fuel growth and to build value. Steve focuses on helping portfolio companies address their talent recruiting strategies and works closely with the deal teams and company management to build top-tier leadership teams. Prior to joining Audex in 2016, Steve worked with two leading executive search firms, and he was the talent partner at a venture capital fund, Kodiak Venture Partners. Steve, great to have you on the team. And then finally, last but not least, Mike Anderson. Welcome, Mike. Mike is an operating partner at One Rock Capital, where he focuses on all aspects of talent for the private equities firm's portfolio companies. Prior to joining One Rock Capital, Mike worked with multiple successful private equity firms. Prior to his work in private equity, he spent 19 years with Spencer Stuart, most recently as the Chief Innovation Officer and Global Head of Products and Services, overseeing substantial growth at Spencer Stuart and their consulting services to help complement the firm's core offerings. Prior to Spencer Stuart, Mike was with McKinsey & Company. It's great to have you, Mike.
Thank you.
So, everyone, thanks for joining. So I teed up a bunch of, hot topics, I guess. I'm sure they're topics that you're facing every day. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to start with Courtney, and let's just have some free-flowing discussion together. So, and once again, if you have questions, please send them over chat or on our Q&A field there. Courtney, what are some of the greatest talent challenges you're hearing from your portfolio companies and your deal teams? And just how are they doing? What are they equipped for?
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see some of the results of the survey, Dan, because we are Little John's middle market investor, lots of companies in the manufacturing, industrial services sector. So not necessarily consumer tech, but I think that retention is really foremost amongst the concerns for our CEOs right now across the board. And most of our companies sort of operated fairly business as usual throughout COVID. A lot of them were considered, essential industries. And so a lot of our portfolio company employees were at their plants and at their sites. And retention, I think, is really, now that things are picking up again in the economy and things are changing, we're really seeing the strain on talent pipelines and on retention at all levels, kind of senior and high potential, as well as entry level folks and hourly employees. The related piece of that is recruiting. Of course, I think a lot of us are seeing that in our portfolio companies right now. Recruiting at the hourly and entry level is get tougher and tougher. One of the things that our companies have been doing to sort of, you asked how people are equipped to deal with this. One of the things I think our companies have been doing that has been helpful is sharing some strategies and sharing some ideas. We have one company that had some luck in a facility that they were building out with geo-targeting and mobile targeting for employees. They've then shared some of that information with some of our other portfolio companies who've been able to leverage and use some of the methods that one of our portfolio companies has had. But I think that sort of sharing of information and network that we've been able to help develop through the pandemic across our portfolio has been one technique to help with that. But I don't think anybody has a silver bullet around retention and talent acquisition right now.
Are you starting to see people leave? I've heard there's a lot of concern about retention. I'm not privy. Are people starting to take off and leave portfolio companies now, or is it more like there's a worry that it's going to happen?
More of a worry. It's more of a worry. It's a busy time. I think we're all aware, and I know there are recruiters on the phone or on the Zoom today, and I think it's a busy time in recruiting right now too. I think that it's yes, certainly there has been a certain amount of people have left and not come back in the particularly in the entry level roles. But really, I think it's the buzz. The media contributes to that too, of course. But
right.
So I think we're starting to see some reinforcement with behavior, but it's also just a concern. And how do we? I think one of the other things that companies that are doing it well are having very transparent conversations with people about their careers, about their needs, about their compensation, about what it's going to take to keep them and retain them in these companies.
Interesting. It's almost like the value proposition is changing a bit, isn't it? Um, so Steve, thank you, Courtney. Let's move to you a little bit. And you know, I get Audex's daily updates on all the acquisitions you've been involved in. I mean, it seems like it does feel like it's daily, but I'll tell you, from our vantage point, private equity has been frenetic in deal making with you know, a lot of capital to put to work. And I'm just curious, with all of the activity you've been involved in, what issues are you starting to see crop up? And I don't know if it's unique, you know, given Audex's activity and the deal making.
Well, it's certainly good that you're seeing a lot of those emails lately. I would say a year ago, you probably weren't seeing a ton of them. I mean, it's amazing what the last 16 to 18 months has brought us. If you know, turn back the clock and sort of look between March, that I always will remember, it was Friday the 13th in March when everything sort of shut down. Those first few months were, you know, full of uncertainty. Deal flow slowed way down. You had service providers, search firms, other consultancies furloughing employees. We had companies furloughing employees. So there was a gap there where not a lot was going on. And I do think that has had an impact on sort of the recovery and when things picked back up around Labor Day. So we saw deal flow really pick back up in late August into Labor Day. And suddenly, you know, you had a lot of people playing catch up, both companies and service providers. If you think of search firms that furloughed a lot of employees back a year ago are probably kicking themselves today saying, I don't have enough people to do the work. I think that's true with the consulting firms as well. But I think all of it has resulted, at least from our perspective, in some real challenges around recruiting and retention. We invest in a broad range of industries, and those which rely heavily upon hourly workers, whether it's you know, warehouse workers, drivers, medical technicians, et cetera, are facing dramatic challenges in hiring and retaining employees. You know, part of that is you know, the unemployment compensation that has ended in some states and will end in September overall has frankly provided somewhat of a disincentive for some people to come back to work. But I do think at a more macro level, it's also workers sort of questioning what it is that they want to go do. So if it's packing boxes in a warehouse or driving a truck or being a medical technician, there's been some reevaluation of career paths that has had a pretty significant impact. We try to, I'm sorry, Dan.
No, go ahead, please. I was going to ask you a follow-up in a second.
No, I was just going to say the thing we've been trying to do is, you know, we facilitate every 2 weeks a roundtable call of all of our HR leaders to kind of share both what are they suffering from and what kind of best practices are potentially emerging across the portfolio that others can leverage. What are they doing to try to retain employees? How are they being creative about recruiting people? And it's, you know, I think everybody's looking for a silver bullet and an answer. The fact of the matter is it's evolving every day. There are different answers that emerge every time we have one of those calls.
Do you have any like one golden example, if it's not silver, like just one, what's one best practice you can remember that people kind of latched onto?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the best practice, but you know what, you're going to have to pay a lot of these hourly workers better than you've been paying them. I don't know any other way to say that, but if you go across the board and sort of look at state by state what minimum wages are and what, you know, the gap is between a $15 an hour minimum wage, or if you really want to, you know, pound your head against the wall, go start looking at living wages in those geographies. It's a pretty significant gap.
Okay, so all right, money talks. I appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for sharing. How about you, Mike? What's keeping you up at night, and you know, in regards to, you know, the health of talent and human capital in your portfolio companies?
Well, definitely the same sorts of things that Courtney and Steve mentioned, but another one that sort of a surprise was the health and effectiveness of the senior executive leadership team as a team, so that the sum of the individuals is greater than the parts, if you will. And working virtually makes it tougher to coordinate and communicate various efforts. And I think that the culture, you mentioned that earlier, of private equity, which is so results focused and sort of, I'll say transactional, maybe that's not fair, but I think the combination of that has led individual executives responsible for supply chain or manufacturing or sales or whatever to kind of double down and focus on their relatively narrow remit. So all well-intentioned, but I'll use supply chain because it's something we're all dealing with. Supply chain obviously has to be solved with close coordination with manufacturing, sales, and finance all together. And I think working remotely has made that tougher. I don't think the teams have invested in or been mindful, if you will, about how to work as a team, because when they're all co-located, you can use a shorthand and just walk down the hall and it happens automatically. So we've been observing that and trying to put in place some sort of best practice or team effectiveness 101 to see if we can address some of the understandable but suboptimal siloed approaches.
Are your management teams in your companies, are they starting to get, have they had any in-person meetings yet this year? Are they starting to pick that up again?
They have, most are. But they're sort of hybrid, if you will.
Okay.
And it still laid bare this opportunity, I guess I'll phrase it, to be more productive, get more out of the team as a team. And so even when they're back together, I think we and they learn that they haven't really thought about how do we use our weekly or bi-weekly executive team meeting? What is a good use of our time? How are we going to make decisions together? And I think those issues probably existed before COVID and the remote working, but I think it surfaced them. And so I think that there's still we're seeing that there's an opportunity and an energy to try and get better at that.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I would agree. I've noticed that I think every management team has changed its operating cadence in some significant way over the last 12 to 18 months, and for the better, mind you. I think they're more focused and probably more frequent, more focused, less all day slideshows. So exactly. That's good. So, well, cool. So definitely hear a lot of challenges around recruitment, talent retention, certainly at, in the hourly ranks, and now management team cohesion and effectiveness. One of the things that I brought up, I know is a little bit of probably a curveball in private equity, is just talking about succession planning. We wanted to ask that question of private equity CEOs, because especially, the journeyman private equity CEOs that kind of hop from business to business, they really don't spend a lot of time in succession. So we wanted to know, is it something that's becoming important? And maybe I'll start with Steve. You brought up retention, you brought up, things around, retention lower level, but you start thinking about in the top of the house, and then we'll ask Mike his thought. What are you seeing as it relates to leadership succession in your portfolio companies? Has that changed? Are you thinking about it more different, or thinking about it differently? Is the conversation elevated or status quo?
It hasn't changed a ton for us. I mean, given our time horizon of kind of 3 to 5 years, succession planning it's a pretty short window to be doing that. Where we are often doing it is if we acquire a founder-led business where that founder has said, I'm in this for another 2 years, but would prefer not to be there at exit, and definitely don't want to go through another turn. Preparing for that early on so that we have a plan in place to sort of do that in a timely manner to address that concern. One thing I do think about, though, is just kind of given the environment, folks who are on the leadership team that have maybe had 1 or 2 successful exits already are perhaps starting to think about pulling the plug a bit earlier than maybe in the past, given what's happened in the last year and a half, and sort of saying maybe it's time to go do something different rather than the grind. Not as much fun to travel and go stay in hotels and be on planes these days.
Rethinking life.
So I do think people are making perhaps some lifestyle changes that will impact that.
Okay, so maybe more with people that are either founders or people that are thinking about what's most important in life may force the discussion. How about maybe Mike and Courtney? Thoughts around succession? Are you talking about succession with your portfolio companies? If so, what does it look like, and how has it changed?
We are, and it's a lot, and it's surprising. I think it was triggered by, we replaced a couple of our CEOs within the last year, and we didn't have any internal options. And when, it's kind of a funny thing for a former headhunter to say, but there's always risk in hiring an outsider, cultural and experience, the whole thing. And I think that was the original trigger to get more formal or structured in succession planning, not just for the CEO, but then more broadly. But there's some more, I don't know, nuanced reasons why we're doing it in a more structured way. One is that under the banner of succession planning, particularly if it's not just for the CEO, but it's for all of the direct reports as well, it highlights opportunities to do some at least assessment and potentially coaching or other performance improvement initiatives. And if you hold up a mirror to your chief marketing officer and point out, gosh, you'd be a little more effective if this and that, you actually can move the needle on the performance in the near term. And if you do it under the banner of succession planning, rather than if you don't do well on this assessment, you're going to lose your job, it provides a great, I'll say excuse, but it's not really cynical. The other one is that we also are finding or believing that it'll create a higher multiple exit if you can say that there's a deeper bench, and that whoever the next buyer is doesn't necessarily have to go, not just the CEO, because even a strategic is going to want to retain like the chief marketing officer or the chief technology officer or whatever. Yeah. And so if you've done taken some measures and efforts to do that. It's funny about the 3 to 5 year thing too, that Steve mentioned. Obviously that's a factor at One Rock and every private equity firm. But then in a different breath, in a different conversation, most private equity firms have done the analysis of how many CEOs or CFOs they replace, and it's a pretty big number. So it's a little naive, or maybe even head in the sand, to say we don't have time to think about succession planning, and yet they lay off, a third to a half of them and replace them. I think you can use that data to prompt some conversations anyway.
Sure. Courtney, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what Mike said. I think it is something that we're talking about more and more, and some of that is, 3 to 5 years, sure, but when you also look at the mathematical holds, sometimes they're longer, right? And you do have times that you're executing a new strategy or trying to help a company through the next phase, and knowing how you're going to do that and whether we have the team to do that with is really important. We've actually had a couple cases recently of CEOs moving on and being able to replace them with people inside the organization, which I think has made everybody very aware of the importance of really knowing who those people are. So getting back to what Mike was saying about using that as an opportunity, or using these conversations about succession as an opportunity to do some assessment, to really know who's on this team, who's in this management, beyond just what you might see in a board meeting, beyond what you might see in an ops call, but really knowing, who are the leaders that value developing other people, and being able to have that confidence that you're making the right move. In a couple of cases where we have promoted an internal candidate, we've looked at external candidates too, and really been able to make a very confident decision that this person is, this insider is right. This insider is right for the role. They've beaten the outsiders, and they have the added benefit of the knowledge of the company and the history. And then there are other times that they don't, right? Where you do need to make that outside move. But I think that having a formal way to have those conversations, we're trying to do this, we're trying to be much more disciplined about doing this, formally once a year with our CEOs, talking about succession and what their bench looks like, and not over processing it. It doesn't have to be a 9-box for everybody, but it's very, it's really having a formal conversation on that annual basis. But then even in the quarterly board meetings, having a quick kind of talent slide, right? A quick talent update. What are the hot spots? What's going well? What's not, what's keeping you up at night? making sure that talent is a part of that conversation so that succession is on everyone's minds means that we can move faster when when we do need to make a replacement, or when we do need to make a decision about who can lead this new business or this new initiative that we have at this company.
Great. No, that's helpful. It's great to hear that you've got different ends of the spectrum. I mean, in some cases, depending on your hold period, it may not be as important, but it sounds like the conversations are beginning to happen more than ever. I'm going to interject a few questions that are popping up. They're popping up on my screen because they're relevant to this topic rather than wait 30 minutes. One of the questions that came through is, how much do you have the right HR heads in these portfolio companies to partner with you on, let's say, all the talent stuff we've talked about so far? I mean, as PE operators, how much do you get them involved in these discussions, or is this a little bit, is it out of their league, or do you have to actually provide support for them? That's an open question for the group.
It's a yes and yes.
Okay.
I view it as a learning opportunity. I definitely partner with them, and most of them seem to appreciate it. And I try hard to not be front and center myself, to the extent that it can be helping and coaching them. And if it's politically difficult for them to be front and center, then of course happy to do it. But I'm sure I saw Courtney and Steve laugh when I said yes and yes.
I mean, I think we're constantly reinforcing to our CEOs the importance of having a senior strategic leader in that HR seat. We also developed an HR roadmap that kind of outlines the journey from really pre-close diligence to exit, that helps reinforce all the work that needs to get done. And it's often somewhat of a challenge. Sometimes you just have CEOs that don't know what good looks like there, and they don't understand the value of having a partner by their side who's looking at the human capital elements of scaling a business. So we spent a lot of time really going through that and reinforcing that the importance of making that a critical member of the leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that having that conversation with the CEOs, we see a variety, right? We see some who get it instantly and have worked with great HR and know how important it is. And then we have others, often in founder-led businesses or in other in smaller businesses where they're kind of used to having a personnel function and not strategic HR. And when they see what that can offer, sometimes they buy in and sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes it's
Sure.
So we try to supplement, where we can, but there are times that, we say, look, we really think you need to upgrade the HR talent, or you need to supplement.
So, the often path of, I'll call it replacement, that you often see in private equity is, if the CEO is a keeper, usually the first person to be replaced is CFO, in most cases. How often are you guys typically, are you actually starting to say, hey, it's time to get a new CHRO? Like, are you guys starting to turn the heat up on that? Whereas, maybe 5 years ago, maybe private equity was, enough, what a warm body is better than nobody. What are you actually raising that requirement? I'm just curious, what that looks in your portfolio companies.
I mean, we're sort of big advocates. I don't know if folks have done any work with Sandy Ogg, but the talent to value work that he's done, and he always talks about the golden triangle,
right?
Which is CEO, CFO, and head of HR, and it's about strategy, capital, and people. And that's a message that we begin to share early on. Now, not every platform that we go by is ready to go hire a senior CHRO leader, but we try to put that into the roadmap of the talent that's going to have to be hired during the hold period, and stress the critical importance of that role.
Great. Any other thoughts on that?
Early days. I could think of one where we upgraded the CHRO, but it is the focus that it should.
Well, how about we switch something related to talent management, talent challenges. Let's talk. I shared some data around diversity and inclusion. And it's, it seems that there's still some opportunity in portfolio companies. I mean, large publicly traded companies have been doing this maybe to different levels of success for years. I guess what I'll do is I'll start with Steve. We mentioned earlier that DE&I is becoming more important in the private equity world at the firm level as well as the portfolio company level. And I'm just curious, how is Audex, how are you as a human capital head evolving your approach, your expectations around DE&I with at both, you can comment on firm or in your investment companies. Love to hear more.
Yeah, I think it's both. So we have a DEI committee at Audex. We're looking at ourselves, which I think, in general, I don't want to label everybody in the private equity world, but if there's an industry that perhaps needs some diversity, equity, and inclusion, it might be the PE industry in general. It's there's a lot of room for improvement there. So we're certainly focusing in on that ourselves. We also are focusing in on the portfolio companies. So we've done things like became a signatory of ILPA, the Institutional Limited Partners Association. We actually use their DEI roadmap as a framework that we share with our portfolio companies to sort of have them begin to grade where they are in their journey in DEI. We've worked with other organizations like MLT and Twigo and Above Board to try to provide access to tools and access to broader pools of talent to diversify, help them diversify in their hiring. We've set standards for our service providers as well that we expect of them. So if you take search firms, for example, we have a document we share with them around our expectations of the diversity we expect to see in every search. It's a long journey, but I think it's something you just have to stay on top of, and we're committed to doing that. We've also done a lot of training of our deal team members on how to initiate conversations with their leadership teams about making sure that DEI initiatives are going to be undertaken within the portfolio companies.
Great, thanks. How about you, Courtney? What are the big challenges, top 2 or 3 challenges, and what's Little John been doing about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll echo the both sides kind of question. On the portfolio company side, it's interesting, the statistic that you had that, 44% of your CEOs that you surveyed said that they don't really have a plan. I think that there can be a feeling that we have to have something that's perfect. We have to have something that's really, really fully baked. We have to have something that, that's kind of waterproof, before we do anything. And one of the conversations we've been having with our portfolio companies is that, what you really need to do is engage with your employees, and you really need to show them that this is important, and you need to have them be a part of co-creating this with you as much as you can. The CEO has to lead. It can't be seen as HR's initiative. It can't be seen as something that's done on the side. It can't be seen as something that we're being forced to do. And so where we've seen our portfolio companies with the kind of the most traction and the most progress, it's been really where the CEO has taken on ownership and has solicited ideas and established a subgroup of people within the company who are working on this together, and where they're being pretty transparent and honest and saying, we're going to learn about this along the way. It's not going to be perfect, but we've made some commitments and here's what they are. And I'm going to keep having this conversation with you, and I'll bring it up in every single, town hall that I'm doing. But really taking that mantle and that responsibility on themselves, I think is very, very important. On the PE side, as Steve was saying, my big realization coming in to private equity from the Fortune 100 3 years ago was, wow, these people that I work with don't have any of the training that I've had, right? They don't, they're not doing this every single year. They're not seeing the same, they don't have access to the same kind of conversations and training and formalized programs. It just hasn't been a part of what they've done. And so starting there, really making sure that our private equity deal folks themselves get it, that they're comfortable talking about it, that they understand what, what the vocabulary is, what the language is, why it's important, and that they have a chance to kind of practice it and ask questions in a safe environment, so that when they are sitting down with our portfolio company CEOs, when they are sitting down with management teams, that they're not uncomfortable having the conversation. That for me was the starting point. Like, how do we make sure that we're comfortable having this, and that we that we know that it's important? There's a general agreement that yes, of course it's important, but but if people aren't comfortable talking about it, then they're going to shy away from the conversation. So I think that working on our own kind of firm discussions around it, as we relate to our portfolio companies, but also then what we're doing for ourselves, right? If we keep doing the same thing over and over again, we're never going to see diversity permeating the private equity ranks.
Sure. So the investor's not going to bring it up at a board meeting if he or she has no comfort in the topic itself. They're just they're going to bury it. Interesting. How about you, Mike? What have you been talking about DE&I with your company, your portfolio company CEOs, and if so or if not, like, what do you think the role of the company CEO is in driving and supporting DE&I?
But I would echo what Courtney and Steve were saying, that getting them comfortable and then talking about it at I think Courtney said every town hall, absolutely, making sure it's on the agenda, making hiring decisions from at least a representative or diverse slate, and so on. The only sort of wrinkle, coming back to my, I guess, favorite topic of the morning, is succession planning. We have used, again, the succession planning banner to include people of color and women in that process as somebody who we're assessing and investing in their development. And even if we know that they're unlikely to be the next CFO, they're kind of 2 levels down, we're still including them and including them in the process and giving them the full benefit of a development focused assessment, so that we're investing in their development as leaders, future leaders or current leaders and professionals, and not singling it out so that it's other, but it's under the umbrella and the banner of the other dozen or so executives that we're assessing anyway. So what's the big deal to add 2 or 3 others?
Understood. Yeah, I've got a few questions coming up around retention within private equity. I just thought it came up a few times. I thought I'd bring it up. And have you maybe not at the senior ranks, but at the middle ranks, have any of you seen any turnover or retention concerns within your private equity firms themselves?
You're talking about within the private equity firm, not within the portfolio companies.
Correct. Within Audex, within Little John, within One Rock.
I think it's always a challenge. There's a competition for talent in these ranks as well, and there's also a grind that folks go through from kind of the analyst ranks up, as they're moving up that career path, and you certainly see movement as a result.
Okay. Going back to the DEI conversation, how are you doing anything different, new to attract talent, diverse talent to the industry? Because let's face it, it's a predominantly white male industry historically, and maybe a lot of minority talent may not be considering private equity as a career path. They may be considering things that have been more traditionally favorable for diverse candidates. Are you doing anything different? Any practices or experiences you want to share?
We've actually had some great success with really creating a new role and creating a new pipeline into private equity. So instead of the traditional just investment banking, we have created an analyst role looking at people who have more the the kind of traditional accounting firm backgrounds, QB experience, recognizing that they can do a lot of the analysis and heavy lifting that our associates can, but maybe haven't been on that same kind of I want to be in private equity since I was a sophomore in college path. And that has really led to, and we did that very intentionally, saying we want to diversify the pools from which we are recruiting. We are a middle market industrial firm that's based in Greenwich, Connecticut. We have some, we can have trouble competing for, young talent. And what we have found is that opening up this new vein of people to come in and work with us has really borne fruit. We've made some terrific hires. We've got 2 more women starting in the next couple of weeks, and I think as you say, it has kind of opened people's eyes to, oh, I didn't necessarily think about this as a path for me with my CPA. But they have been, and they've been really successful, and they've really embraced the challenge.
Great example. Thanks, Courtney. Anything else to add there, guys? No. So when I'll ask one more question, and then I'm gonna flip through the questions that I'm getting a lot pinged here. A lot of the portfolio companies that you're investing in, I mean, they don't, they're not PepsiCo, they're not, Spencer Stewart. They don't have the resources that maybe the larger companies have. I'm just curious, what role do you all play when it comes to helping them address these pressing talent, succession, DE&I needs? What's your support model? How do you provide it? And just any advice for those out there that are considering a role like yours, and kind of, here's what I've learned so far.
One, starting with education of the deal teams.
Yep.
At Spencer Stewart, I did for a couple of private equity firms when they were clients, sort of executive assessment or interviewing 101 workshops, sort of all-day workshop, and have now done that at One Rock. And so just opening their eyes to what even a leadership competency framework is, and so that they don't just default to, oh, this person knows this for fact, it's chemical business, and they went to Yale, so they're going to be a great CEO. Getting more specific about what great leadership really looks like and what it is. So some of it starts with education, and they seem to have liked that. So they've asked for another one around how to have difficult conversations. So now I think we're going down the EQ path, and that's going to get to team dynamics and so on. So there's an openness, if you can do it in an efficient, kind of interactive, entertaining way, sort of a 2-hour workshop, and maybe a follow-on optional. That's one way. So, great example. Good best practice. Steve or Courtney, any thoughts on that? On how you're supporting your portcos that may not have the resources and expertise that you have?
We look to, our model is kind of a pull, not a push, right? So we look to build and nurture relationships with a broad range of service providers, and provide access to for those portfolio companies to kind of what they need. So we serve almost as general contractors, kind of in building the house, and we have the craftspeople and the trades that we can pull together to create that solution for them. But it's educating them on what's available and when to call and ask for help, which for me is like, anytime you got a question, call, because I may not have the answer, but we'll help you get it. That's something we make clear to the companies from the day that we close the deal, that we're here to help support them on the journey with Audax.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Our approach is very similar. We either our own resources, consultants that we work with regularly, groups that we engage with. We've actually been investing, particularly in the last year, in some more, kind of operating support that is part of Little John. That kind of similar to me in a talent role. We have people who have procurement expertise, sales expertise, who can go and work with our companies, and we're investing also in some resources who can help with the value creation plan that that are Little John resources, that understand how we work, that know our deal teams, that know our processes, and can really help our new portfolio companies in particular get a jump start and know what we're kind of what the language is, what we're looking for. What does that first board deck need to look like? How do we move quickly, instead of using that first board meeting as just a getting to know you session? How do you really make sure that there's driving value there? And that's which, by the way, is another way to bring diverse talent into the firm. We've been able to recruit from some different kinds of profiles for that too, but and providing that resource then to our portfolio companies as a here's something free. Let us help you.
That's great. So it sounds very part educator, part advisor, but definitely partner. That's always there for them. I appreciate you sharing that. So I've got some questions that I'm going to kind of read off to you, and why don't we just call it a, we'll just see, we'll have a little frenzy and see who wants to answer the question. I'll pick a few that have popped up. I have a question here. As you respectively think about retention, how willing are you to, with your portfolio companies, to push and stretch high potentials with the fear that they might actually leave at some point, because it's a hot job market? Just curious, does anybody have a point of view on that?
You mean in terms of it? Well, I think if the question is pushing to move a high potential into
push, I think the push, stretch, put them in a stretch role, take a little risk on them.
I think it's a wonderful, I think it's a wonderful solution, right? It's a win-win. I think, again, that's where some assessment helps, so that you kind of have a sense of what the risks are, what the watch outs are, and making sure that the CEO, the deal team, the board, whoever's involved in that person's development is very aware of what their strengths and gaps are. But I think it's a great way to retain people and to use the inherent knowledge that exists inside your company and your people.
Okay. Let me throw out another question, see how you guys think about this. When you think about new skill sets and leaders, given what we've, let's just say, learned about how people operate during a pandemic and a crisis situation when it comes to risk management, flexibility, are the fund investors looking back at how the management team handled this in the past? Are you developing new points of view on certain leaders, certain management teams based on how they've either successfully or unsuccessfully managed the pandemic? Has there been a little post-mortem? So not that we're completely out of it, but a bit of a look back.
Well, there's nothing like adversity for showing who are good leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
We saw a lot of people step up to the plate. At least we have 50 companies, so we saw people who we perhaps didn't think would navigate the crisis as well as they did step up and really show. Right. It really shows where those leadership skills exist in a person. At least that's certainly one of the things we saw over the last year and a half.
Has the profile changed? I mean, let's go backwards 18 months. The standard CEO profile that, the scorecard that you put together, you give it to the search firm, they look for a CEO, or you hopefully give it to Summit and we're doing the assessment for you. Have those capabilities changed at all? Would you say, yeah, we've added this, or we have a different point of view on that? I'm just curious, how's your thinking about what you care about to run in terms of who runs the company? Has that evolved?
I think it fed into, I referenced the leadership competency framework or whatever. It's helped our deal teams realize that capabilities are as important as experiences, because you don't know what experiences the world's going to serve up on your plate at any time. And so if you've assessed or hired somebody, promoted somebody based on their ability to lead change or navigate uncertainty, it's helped make the case for what I just said. Hiring is much for how a leader operates and their capabilities, and not just what they've done before.
Yeah,
okay.
The holy grail of agility, right?
Yeah.
Emphasizing.
I don't think we'll add a key accountability to the scorecard that is navigate the next pandemic.
Or the next something, yeah. I had another question that came up here regarding DE&I, and just have any of your firms been, as I'll call it, proactive, assertive, whatever you want to call it, in terms of setting goals, numbers, expectations, tying it to comp? And if so, do you have any concerns about that running afoul someday? You see that a lot in publicly traded companies now. I think I saw a study just under 50% of, as part of the ESG umbrella, they're putting numbers out there. I'm just curious, have any of you gone that far?
Some of our portfolio
Yeah.
companies have, certainly.
More self-imposed, not coming from Little John, is what you're saying. Okay.
We do have, I hope we're making an offer to a head of ESG who will be a full-time employee of One Rock, and will work with the portfolio companies as well as report on ESG metrics to the LPs, which I think is sort of table stakes these days and sort of boring. I think we're making progress on that, and we're going to systematize it in that way.
Great.
We just did the same. We have the person starting in a week to lead our ESG efforts as well.
So I know we've got just a few minutes left. I'm going to ask one question you didn't plan on. The question is what if when you think about your roles as human capital heads in private equity, what have you learned over the last 12 to 18 months? What's new about you, new about your role, maybe different in how you interact with portfolio companies, firms, or hell, even service providers? How have you changed as a result of the last, it may even be personal, over the last 16 months?
Probably one of the biggest, one of the biggest things I've learned is how much people need and value the kind of, the connectors, right? The connectors between, Steve mentioned the every 2 weeks roundtable, that's there were things that kind of felt very motherhood and apple pie that we instituted during COVID, and, internally with the firm, discussion groups, as well as across the portfolio company, making connections between CEOs, making connections amongst the deal team. I think a lot of us who come out of a recruiting sort of world and a talent sort of world have an affinity for that and a talent for that and like doing it. And I've realized how valuable people have found that in, particularly when everyone was working remotely, particularly when everyone was kind of nervous about what was next. But just the very act of like, I'm going to put a call on the calendar was, even if that's all it was a hugely, hugely valued by the people in our companies and in our firm.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Mike, Steve, you have something you'd be willing to share?
Maybe the word humility keeps jumping into my head, but I'm not sure that's probably an overstatement, but something about flexibility. It feels like our deal teams are a little more, this also doesn't sound very nice, but human. Realizing that there's a lot in the world you really can't control, and you can do all the base case and downside case and upside spreadsheet case in the world, and then at the end of the day, you have a bunch of human beings who are just trying to figure out how to, not kill their kids because their daycare got shut down, and I think that there's just a little bit more, maybe generosity is the word, and I think it's going to end up adding to the value creation, not detracting, which is going to be sort of ironic.
That's great.
Yeah, I think
humanizing private equity. That's what I just heard. Go ahead, Steve.
More resilient than we thought.
Yeah.
That's it. There's something we learned, and the other thing is this medium, despite the fact that we aren't all together, and the way we have managed to navigate this pandemic is with one another and through teamwork. It also has let us see a side of each other that we didn't get to see when we were together. So if it's somebody's dog jumping in their lap, or a kid running through the background, or something going on in your life, actually humanized the interactions to a level that we didn't see before, which I think was an unexpected consequence of the Zoom world, right? And it's when you think about the change that we've all navigated the last 18 months, it's really remarkable. Somebody said, "Hey, you're going to go to working virtually tomorrow," and how long would that really take you? I think there was a McKinsey study, I think, that said if you had tried to plan the navigation to remote video, it would take 2 to 3 years for companies to plan that. Yet they had to do it overnight. And when you're done with something like that, you just have to adapt.
That's great. Well, I guess I consider the three of you as, some of the more authentic, adaptable, real people out there. And as you were talking, I felt like you're describing yourselves. I think in a lot of ways, maybe also the human capital function in private equity has gained, a bit more clout because they really relied a hell of a lot on you over the last 16, 18 months. No one can put on a spreadsheet or a investment plan what we just went through. And I really hope, I believe that your function itself has really led the way in many different aspects, which is awesome. It's great. It's really, really gratifying to see. I want to thank the three of you for joining the panel. Always impressed with your great answers, your experience, and also maybe even most importantly, your commitment to advancing the function around human capital and private equity. You're great role models for that. So thank you, Steve, Courtney, and Mike for joining us. I had a few people that have asked for a copy of that report that I keep referring to. So just quick, if you're interested in the white paper, it will be ready at the end of the week. We had it written up by took all of our data and put it in writing, and we'll have about a 10-page white paper on the study we just conducted. And be happy to send it to you. Just send a note to info@summitleadership.com and we'll send you a free copy. But otherwise, thank you once again, everyone, for joining. Great times ahead, and certainly going to be a busy 2021. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.